The last two main areas I'd like to look at are the defamation. Defamation, no-brainer. You have to study defamation. It didn't come up in the last question. It maybe slightly came in tied in with a passing off question. But defamation, I would imagine, in as much as anything can be guaranteed with these FE1 papers, defamation is guaranteed. Defamation can come up in the form of a problem question or an essay question just as easily. If it comes in as an essay question, it more than likely will focus on reform of defamation. That's tended to be popular over the last year or so. You know yourself, the Defamation Bill 2006. Again, we have a change of government. Whether that'll ever see the light of day is a whole other issue. But again, it's out there. So you'll be familiar with the main provisions. You know, it's talking about abolishing the distinction between libel and slander, talking about introducing a new defence of reasonable publication, so kind of negligence standard, etc. Talking about adhering to the Press Council and being part of the Press Council, and so on and so forth. So if it's an essay question, knowledge of the Defamation Bill will be vitally important. Again, don't fall into the trap of seeing defamation in the paper and writing a whole essay on the tort of defamation and then rereading the question and seeing it says, discuss the defences to defamation. That's not asking you to discuss the tort at all, okay? It's asking you something specific. So you want to score more marks, you tailor that to the question. So in relation to defamation, be familiar with the elements of the tort. Publication, defamatory statement identifies the plaintiff. Publication is basic communication to a third party. Libel is a permanent form, slander, not so. Also, don't forget issues like republication, where somebody makes a statement or utters a statement, like on camera here, and then gives it to an IT company who puts it up on a website. The website or the ISP could be liable for that, because not only have I made the defamatory statement, not only has it been recorded and put up on the website, well then that's republication, and that person could be sued just as easily as well. Defamatory statement, objective test, reasonable members of society, tends to lower you in the eyes of right-thinking members of society. Objective, it's not what people actually thought, it's what right-thinking members of society would think. Be careful in relation to the defamation question, defamatory statement. It's of the innuendo, something that is implied, okay, so that you read between the lines. So the defamatory statement rarely nowadays, with newspapers at least, comes out and says, he's a crook. It'll say, well, I saw him take a brown paper envelope from such and such a person. I'm not saying anything. Well, that's an innuendo, and you might as well have said that politician was taking bribes, okay? So be familiar with the innuendo as well. Finally, be aware of the defences, because the question, if it's a problem question, will invariably involve a discussion of the defences. So truth or justification, qualified privilege, be familiar with qualified privilege and the extension of it to the media in the Reynolds decision, and also the Blum-Cooper decision in Ireland, and maybe reference it to the reasonable publication defence in the new defamation bill. But the defence will be vitally important. And fair comment, offer of amends, apology, etc., they're very, very important as well. Finally, in relation to the core torts themselves, have a look at Rylands and Fletcher. I mentioned Rylands and Fletcher simply because nuisance and trespass to land came up in the last paper. I think it's less likely it's going to come up this time. And usually there is a question on the land-based torts. Be familiar with that. Strict liability, bringing something dangerous onto the property that's likely to do mischief if it escapes. So you're looking for a non-natural use, something escaping, thereby causing damage. Strict liability, note the Cambridge Water case in that as well. So in terms of, they're the main topics I would ask you to look at, and there's about 5 or 6 topics there. What I would ask you to look at also are 3 other subheadings, which will apply to any of those topics. Your chapter on damages. You got an essay question on the last paper, but no damages. It'll come up as part of a question, a problem question. Advise Mary in relation to potential claims she may have and any damages she's entitled to. So at least have a knowledge there of the damages in the different categories. Maybe also note the Short versus the Commissioner regard the Supreme Court decision in 2007 in relation to exemplary damages and the award of exemplary damages there. That was the Short case in the McBrearty Tribunal, where the behaviour of the Gardaí was seen as being unconstitutional, and therefore the court awarded exemplary damages. Be familiar with the limitation periods. Are there any obstacles to recovery? If the question says anything about Mary 3 years ago was in a car accident, etc., that's asking you to look at the limitation periods, so be familiar with those. And also, vitally important, the defences, okay? Contributory negligence is the most popular, but also don't forget the defence of waiver or maybe illegality as well. I would stay away, and again, this is just my opinion, I would stay away from product liability, or to study to a lesser extent, maybe is a better way of saying it. Study to a lesser extent, product liability, nuisance, trespass, and passing off. The only reason I say this, so ignore this advice if you know better, which you probably do, The only reason I stay away from these topics is that they've arisen on a very intermittent basis down through the years, and they all came up in the very last paper. That's the only basis for my decision. Finally then, there are a number of very short chapters that might seem like, oh, I'm not going to study that chapter, it's an extra chapter. There's a couple of chapters that you could look at and learn off in 2 hours. Concurrent wrongdoers, liability of public authorities, statutory duties, liability for animals, builder's liability, fatal injuries. There's 4 or 5 topics there that could come up as a subsidiary point. They rarely ever come up on their own. They could do, but they rarely ever do. But they will come up in some form or other in a subsidiary fashion in a problem question. So it's well worth your while studying those. It might take you 2 or 3 hours to learn those all off. And while I don't think they'll come up as a question on their own, I do think you'll get bonus marks if you're able to discuss them in the context maybe of a general negligence question. So to sum up then, basically, I'd just like to say that concentrate on the main principles of negligence, particularly pay attention to the duty of care, to causation. Psychiatric damage, yes, even though it came up in the last paper, simply because as an essay question. And also occupiers' liability, employers and Rylands. And don't forget to have your defences, limitations and damages covered as well. And you should be fine for the paper. Best of luck.